What would you do if your child was accused of a crime they didn't commit? Today, we follow Mila, an innocent young girl who enters her father's jewelry store, only to face a terrible accusation and injustice. When a moment of admiration turns into a nightmare, her father steps in, revealing the painful reality of prejudice and the strength of a parent's love. Watch to the end to see how one act of bravery changes everything. The sun cast a gentle glow over Camden Street as Mila stepped into the silver parlor, her father's opulent jewelry store. It was always a magical place, especially after school, when she had the showroom to herself, and everything felt like it was sparkling just for her. Today, however, she was alone. Her father, Marcus Alton, had left for a meeting. Yet, he had promised to return soon, leaving Mila free to wander and gaze at the dazzling display cases. She ran her fingers along the polished gold countertops, feeling the cool smoothness of the glass, entranced by the beauty around her. Rows of precious stones glimmered in various cases, ruby rings, emerald necklaces, and delicate diamond-studded earrings. Mila marveled at a bracelet, resting delicately in the case before her, its silver band studded with opal stones. She leaned in, her breath fogging the glass slightly, studying the way the colors danced and shifted within each opal, like fragments of a dream captured within stone. But as Mila admired the bracelet, she became aware of a sensation, a prickling along her neck, as if someone was watching her intently. She glanced up and saw Mississippi Grove, her father's new employee, observing her with an expression of cold displeasure. Tall, with a rigid posture and sharp, penetrating eyes, Mississippi Grove seemed to belong more to an iron fortress than to the silver parlor's refined ambience. Mila tried to ignore the woman's gaze, her focus returning to the bracelet, but her sense of tranquility had vanished. She reached her hand out unconsciously, her fingertips brushing against the case's edge. The bracelet shifted slightly, slipping from its stand. In her attempt to steady it, Mila accidentally nudged it farther, and with a soft clink, it slid off the display and landed on the glass shelf below. Her heart skipped, and she reached to pick it up, her hands trembling slightly. But before she could touch the bracelet, Miss Grove's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" Mila froze, lifting her head slowly to see Mississippi Grove standing over her, her face contorted in a sneer. The woman's tone was laced with contempt, her eyes narrowed with cold suspicion. I didn't mean to," Mila stammered, feeling her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and fear. "It was an accident. I was just looking." Mississippi Grove took a step closer, her towering figure casting a shadow over Mila. "An accident, was it?" Her voice dripped with venom. "Or were you planning to steal it, just like people like you always do?" The words hit Mila like a physical blow, the accusation sinking into her mind with a chilling weight. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No. I wasn't. I didn't." But Mississippi Grove wasn't listening. Her eyes burned with a fiery disdain that Mila had never encountered before. Suddenly, the woman's hand shot out, and before Mila could react, a stinging slap landed across her face, making her stumble backward. She gasped, one hand flying to her cheek, the skin already throbbing with pain. The world seemed to spin, and she felt the cold, hard surface of the floor beneath her as she landed with a painful thud. The humiliation was almost as sharp as the pain. She felt tears gathering in her eyes, but she blinked them back, determined not to let them fall. Through her blurred vision, she saw Mississippi Grove standing over her, her hand still raised, a twisted look of satisfaction on her face. "You little thief," Mississippi Grove spat, her voice low and dangerous. "People like you don't belong here. You think you can just waltz in and take what you want?" "No," Mila whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, it was an accident. I didn't mean to." But her words were cut short as Mississippi Grove pulled out her phone, dialing with the casual demeanor of someone ordering lunch. "Yes, I'd like to report an attempted theft at the Silver Parlor," she said smoothly, her voice laced with an unsettling calm. "I've restrained the suspect, yes, a young girl. Please send someone quickly." Mila felt her heart sink. The police? But she hadn't done anything wrong. Panic clawed at her throat, and she struggled to sit up, pressing a hand to her sore cheek. "Please," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to." Miss Grove's icy gaze flicked to her, and she smirked. "Save your lives for the police." Minutes later, the bell above the door jangled as two police officers stepped into the store, their eyes scanning the scene. Mila felt a flicker of hope, praying that they would listen, that they would understand. "She's the one," Mississippi Grove said immediately, pointing at Mila, who was still on the floor. "Caught her red-handed trying to steal a bracelet." One of the officers approached Mila, crouching down to meet her eyes. His face was impassive, his gaze hard and unyielding. "Is this true, young lady?" he asked, his tone cold. "Did you try to take something from this store?" Mila shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, it was an accident. I didn't mean to drop it." The officer's expression didn't change. "You're going to have to come with us," he said, reaching for her arm. Panic surged through her, and she tried to pull away, her voice rising in desperation. "No, please. I didn't do anything. It was just a mistake." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The other officer grabbed her other arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. Mila felt a fresh surge of tears prickle at the corners of her eyes as they forced her hands behind her back and secured them with cold, unforgiving metal cuffs. The clicking of the handcuffs seemed impossibly loud in her ears, echoing in the empty store. She cast a desperate glance at Mississippi Grove, hoping for a sliver of mercy, a sign that she would stop this nightmare. But Mississippi Grove only watched with a look of grim satisfaction, her arms crossed, a faint smirk on her lips. As the officers led her toward the door, Mila felt her world crumble around her. She had always known this store as a place of wonder, of safety and beauty. But now, with each step, it became a prison, filled with shadows and cold, uncaring faces. They pushed her into the back of the police car, the door slamming shut behind her. She sat there, trembling, her wrists aching from the tight cuffs, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside the window, the world blurred past in streaks of color, but Mila barely saw it. All she could feel was the crushing weight of injustice, a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. Back at the silver parlor, the door swung open with a force that made Mississippi Grove jump. Marcus Alton stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene before him. The police, his daughter in handcuffs, and Mississippi Grove with her smug, self-satisfied expression. "What," he said, his voice low and deadly, "is going on here?" Miss Grove's expression faltered, her eyes widening slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus cut her off, his gaze fixed on the officers. "Why is my daughter in handcuffs?" he demanded, his voice like steel. The officers exchanged a look, one of them clearing his throat. "We were responding to a report of attempted theft, sir," he said, glancing uncertainly at Mississippi Grove. "The young girl was accused by the saleswoman." "That young girl is my daughter," Marcus interrupted, his voice icy. "And she's no thief." Miss Grove's face paled, her previous confidence dissolving into panic. "Sir, I didn't know." "Didn't know?" Marcus's voice was deadly calm. "You laid your hands on my daughter, humiliated her, called the police, all because of an accident?" "I thought," Mississippi Grove stammered, her eyes darting between Marcus and the officers. "I thought she was stealing." "You thought wrong," Marcus said coldly. He turned to the officers, his voice sharp. "Take those handcuffs off my daughter. Now." One of the officers moved quickly, fumbling with the keys as he unlocked the cuffs, his face flushed with embarrassment. Mila's wrists were red and raw, the skin irritated from the metal's pressure. She looked up at her father, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Marcus knelt beside her, his expression softening as he gently touched her cheek. "Are you all right, Mila?" he asked quietly. Mila nodded, though her voice was shaky. She clung to him, burying her face in his chest, the tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally spilling over. Marcus held her close, his anger simmering just below the surface. But when he looked up at Mississippi Grove, his expression was one of cold, controlled fury. "You're fired," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my store." Mississippi Grove opened her mouth to protest, but the look in Marcus's eyes silenced her. She turned, her face pale, and walked quickly toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor. As she left, one of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir, there's still the matter of the accusation," he began hesitantly. "We need to investigate further," the officer finished awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had turned. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his patience already worn thin. "There's nothing to investigate," he said sharply. "You acted on a false report without even considering my daughter's side of the story. Instead, you humiliated an innocent child." The officer shifted, his discomfort evident. "Sir, we were following protocol based on the accusation we received." "Protocol?" Marcus interrupted, his voice like ice. "Your protocol allowed a child to be handcuffed without a shred of evidence. Don't talk to me about protocol when it means my daughter was treated like a criminal." The officers exchanged glances, visibly caught off guard. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice subdued. "We apologize, Mr. Alton. We didn't mean for it to escalate this way." Marcus's gaze was unrelenting. "Then make sure it never happens again." He looked each officer in the eye, ensuring his words struck deep. "I want your names, and I want a formal apology to my daughter on record. And I expect a full investigation into how this was handled by everyone involved." The officers nodded, subdued, scribbling down their information before quietly leaving the store, casting glances over their shoulders as if Marcus's presence alone demanded an unspoken respect. Marcus knelt again beside Mila, brushing a tear from her cheek. "It's over now, Mila. You're safe. No one will ever hurt you like that again." She clung to him, the last traces of her fear melting into the comfort of her father's embrace. The tension that had gripped her chest began to ease, though the memories still lingered, fresh and raw. "Daddy, I was so scared," she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought they were going to take me to jail." Marcus's heart ached at her words. He held her tighter, brushing a comforting hand over her hair. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mila. Remember that. What happened today wasn't your fault. It was ignorance and prejudice." Mila nodded, though her fingers trembled as she wiped her cheeks. The ordeal had shaken her, but her father's words brought her a sense of solace. "Thank you for standing up for me." Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, looking into her eyes. "I'll always stand up for you, Mila. Always." In the days that followed, the Silver Parlor was abuzz with whispered conversations. News of the incident spread quickly, the story evolving as customers and employees alike shared their own versions of what had happened. Marcus made a point to address the store's staff directly, taking a firm stance on zero tolerance for prejudice within his business. He gathered everyone in the main showroom, his gaze scanning the faces of his employees. "What happened here will never happen again," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made even the veteran employees stand a little straighter. "The Silver Parlor is a place of beauty, of art. It's a place where every customer, every child, and every person should feel welcome, no matter who they are or what they look like." Mila stood in the back, watching her father with pride. She could feel the strength in his words, the promise of a safer place, a better future. The store she once feared was slowly becoming the sanctuary it had been before. Marcus didn't stop at the staff meeting. He implemented a strict anti-discrimination training program, one that he personally oversaw. Each employee went through intensive training on racial sensitivity, customer service, and handling high-stakes situations with professionalism. The changes Marcus made extended beyond the store. He became vocal in the local business community, using the incident as a call to action for other business owners to reassess their policies and training programs. He spoke at community meetings, organized forums on racial sensitivity, and partnered with local organizations to promote inclusivity and understanding. What had started as a painful incident transformed into a powerful movement, one that Marcus was determined to see through. Several weeks later, the trial for Miss Grove's actions began. Marcus attended every hearing, his presence unwavering as he listened to the testimonies and reviewed the evidence. Mila was spared from testifying, but she knew that her father was fighting for her peace of mind, and for justice. The prosecutor presented a thorough case, emphasizing the racial bias and malice that had driven Miss Grove's actions. The security footage from the store was damning, showing the slap, the call to the police, and Miss Grove's expression of smug satisfaction as Mila was taken away. There was no doubt about her intent. Her actions had been driven by prejudice, and her response had been a calculated act of cruelty. Miss Grove's defense attempted to argue that she had acted out of concern for the store's security, but the prosecutor quickly dismantled this argument. The footage made it painfully clear that Miss Grove's actions had not stemmed from fear, but from a deep-seated bias that had clouded her judgment and led her to treat an innocent child with hostility. The jury deliberated for a short time before returning with a guilty verdict. Mississippi Grove was convicted on multiple counts, including assault and false reporting, and sentenced to several years in prison. Justice had been served, but for Marcus, it was only a partial victory. Standing on the courthouse steps after the sentencing, Marcus was met by a crowd of reporters, microphones extended, cameras flashing. Mila stood by his side, her small hand clasped tightly in his. Marcus held up a hand, signaling for silence. "I have one thing to say," he began, his voice steady, yet carrying an edge that silenced the crowd. "What happened to my daughter was an act of hatred, driven by prejudice. Today, justice was served, but this isn't just about Mississippi Grove. This is about making sure that our communities, our businesses, and our police no longer tolerate discrimination in any form." He paused, glancing down at Mila, who looked up at him with a mixture of pride and trust. "This is for her," he continued, his voice filled with emotion. "And for every child who deserves to grow up in a world where they are judged by their character, not by the color of their skin." The reporters murmured in agreement, their cameras flashing as they captured the moment. Marcus turned, guiding Mila away from the crowd and toward their car, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. As they walked, Mila felt a sense of closure, a newfound confidence that her father's promise of safety was not just words, but a reality he had fought to make true. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's words sparked conversations throughout the city. The incident became a catalyst for change, inspiring local businesses to reevaluate their policies and implement stronger measures against discrimination. Schools began incorporating lessons on empathy and tolerance into their curricula, and community leaders organized workshops and forums on inclusivity. The Silver Parlor itself became a symbol of this change, a place where people of all backgrounds felt welcome and valued. Mila returned to the store with a sense of pride, her father's hard work evident in every interaction, every customer who stepped through the doors. And as she walked through the store, her gaze fell once more on the display case that held the opal-studded bracelet, the same bracelet that had started it all. But now, the fear and humiliation she had once associated with it had faded, replaced by a sense of resilience, a knowledge that she had overcome something difficult and come out stronger. Standing beside her, Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You know, Mila," he said quietly, his gaze on the bracelet, "you taught me something through all this." Mila looked up at him, her curiosity piqued. "What's that?" Marcus smiled, a warmth in his eyes that spoke of both pride and admiration. "You taught me that even in the face of unfairness, of prejudice, there's a strength inside us that no one can take away. You showed me what it means to be brave." Mila felt a smile spread across her face, a sense of peace settling over her. She looked back at the bracelet, its stones glinting in the light, and in that moment, it no longer felt like a symbol of fear, but one of triumph, of resilience. Together, they turned, walking through the store that had been transformed not only in policy but in spirit. It was a place of beauty once again, but now, it held a deeper meaning, a testament to the strength that had been forged in the fires of adversity, a strength that would carry them forward into a brighter, more just future. As they left the silver parlor that day, hand in hand, Mila knew that she was not just safe, she was loved, respected, and empowered. And that knowledge was the greatest gift her father could have ever given her. As Mila and her father, Marcus, stepped out into the cool afternoon, the sun cast a warm glow over Camden Street, illuminating the path before them. For Mila, it felt like stepping out of a shadow, like the entire city was finally welcoming her with open arms. She looked up at her father, her heart swelling with gratitude and pride. This wasn't just the end of a single painful moment, it was the beginning of a new understanding of her place in the world. They walked quietly for a while, Marcus's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He glanced down, sensing the quiet contemplation in her eyes. "You know, Mila," he said softly, his voice filled with a tenderness she hadn't often heard, "sometimes we have to face darkness to realize just how strong we really are." Mila nodded, her gaze forward but her mind racing with thoughts of the past few weeks. She understood now that standing up for herself and for others would be a lifelong journey. It wasn't just about today, or about Mississippi Grove, it was about all the small injustices that happened every day, to people who might never get the chance to speak up. "I won't forget what happened, Daddy," Mila said, her voice steady, her gaze determined. "And I'll always stand up for what's right. Not just for me, but for anyone who needs it." Marcus felt a surge of pride, his own heart swelling at his daughter's quiet resolve. He knew that she had been forever changed by what had happened, but he also knew she had emerged stronger, more resilient. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "And I'll be there with you, every step of the way," he promised, knowing that his support, his love, would be her foundation. As they continued down Camden Street, their path illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun, Marcus realized that this incident had reshaped not only Mila's future but his own as well. Together, they would continue to fight for a world where everyone, no matter their background, would be treated with respect and dignity. They were a team, bonded not only by love but by a shared vision of justice. With the last rays of sunlight casting their shadows long on the pavement, father and daughter walked forward, toward a brighter, fairer world they would help build together, one step at a time.